Pie in the Sky Media. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Branden. You're listening to episode 121, part 2 of The Recruit. Previously on part 1, 2 days after graduating from basic training in the Navy, 25-year-old Pam Cajones was found beaten and strangled to death at an abandoned home in Sanford, Florida, the morning of August 5th, 1984. At the crime scene, a pubic hair was collected from Pam's shoulder, and also a biological sample from her clothing, believed to be from the killer. Within days of her murder, a dental tech with the Navy named Jamie Bowers would become their prime suspect. He'd been seen dancing with Pam the weekend she was murdered. He'd given her a ride back to the base on his motorcycle that night. And on top of that, when he was being interviewed, he acted strange. Investigator Jen Spears.
When they talked to him, he said, well, he kind of offered, he started talking about how, I've wanted to be military police, and, I'm still thinking about doing that, and here's what I think happened to her. He told the detectives back at the time that he thought she went out on a date with somebody and they started maybe messing around or about to have sex. She decided she didn't want to do it and tried to get away, but the guy ended up raping her, and she got up and tried to run and only got so far before he got on top of her and strangled her and then dumped her. And they're thinking, wow, that sounds like it's potentially exactly what could have happened or close to. That's interesting.
If he wasn't involved, why would he know so much about the crime? And also, during their investigation, detectives discovered that Bowers allegedly had a history of bringing young women back to his place for predatory purposes.
So during the interviews back in the beginning, back in 84 and 85, and then again in the 90s when they're interviewing different people that knew Jamie Bowers as well as all the guys that he lived with, there was rumors that these guys would bring women in and, for a lack of a better term, this is their term, they would run a train on them. And they would take turns having sex with these women, and that this was a frequent thing in this house where all these guys lived. So the thought was, okay, well, if he's not the one that left the pubic hair on her, maybe one of his other roommates did, or maybe this was a big party and somebody else left it there, but we still think Jamie's involved because of his odd behavior from day one when he got interviewed and his perception of what had happened.
By the end of episode 1, there was no physical evidence tying Bowers to the case, but he was still a suspect, as were a legion of other dental techs based in Florida at the time of Pam's murder. Here's a clip of my co-host Branden Morgan and I discussing the end of last week's episode in our bonus content.
What we wound up learning about these guys, it just makes it even worse, right? Like how they were treating women and what their objective was, and it makes me angry, especially as a father of daughters and just as a member of the human race, that, I'm not some prude. I know that there are dudes out there like that. Like, I get it, but man, and just to have her unceremoniously just dumped in some overgrown yard of an abandoned, ramshackle house is just, and I hope that comes back into play because, you kind of hung a lantern on, at least Jen did, like, you got to know the area. It's not off the main road. It's not off the highway. Like, you have to know that this place exists. You're not just going to stumble upon it, right?
Well, and here's the thing about a case like this,
Yeah.
and I think that this illustrates it. I'm not going to give anything away, but it's like you really don't have a lot. So you're going on, it could be a random freaking thing where he just happened to be like, hey, I'm going to pull over and this is my stop, right? Or, so you could be putting a lot of significance to something that was just a random event. In the 80s, it's like, they don't have DNA technology. They have to shoe leather detective work. They had the dental techs, they had the people trying to talk to with the military who'd already been shipped out, trying to get that full picture. I mean, how frustrating would that be? Because
Absolutely.
her murder really affected a lot of the community, because she was, it's just a sad story of somebody who's going to start a new life. And, she just was shopping on her first Liberty Pass, and then this horrible thing happens.
Well, I can't wait for part 2. So everybody stay tuned.
So, from last week, Jamie Bowers is still a prime suspect, even though his DNA didn't match the profile of the suspected killer, mostly because of what he said and the way he acted after the murder. How years later he would admit that he danced with Pam the weekend she was murdered, and that he'd driven her back to the barracks on the base where she was living. The description of his motorcycle seemed to match up with the grease stain that had been found on her rolled-up pant leg, and during the investigation, they'd spoken to his ex-wife, who had a lot to say. She'd claimed that Bowers had asked her to say that they were still in a relationship at the time Pam was found murdered, and that they had been with each other that night, but his ex would say that they weren't together. His ex-wife also confirmed that in addition to his motorcycle, Jamie Bowers also had a beater car. Apparently it was an old Hornet, and it was weird because after Pam was killed, his ex-wife said he'd ripped out the entire interior of the car, which investigators found highly suspicious. Why would you take the time to pull out all the carpeting and seats from your old car that wasn't really worth much? The answer seemed obvious to investigators: to get rid of any physical evidence that potentially could have connected him to Pam, if he was the killer, or involved in her murder in some way. It also meant that he had the ability to transport her body to that abandoned home, if he had been involved.
It was a habit for the male dental techs to basically stand there when these women are graduating and being like, hey, we know you've been cooped up here for months without being able to get off the base, and no alcohol and no fun and no sex, and we're here to offer all of that to you, and would take these women out. So they started focusing on the dental techs from early on in the first place. But Orlando was the the training school for the dental techs, so there was a lot of dental techs. I think over 200 dental techs in Orlando at the time, in training in 3 different areas of the base that they were housed in and that they were working. But because of that, we started, let's start taking DNA from all the male dental techs.
Which is all to say, even though his DNA profile didn't match when he provided samples a decade later, investigators were still suspicious of Bowers, but they were also laser focused on all of the dental techs assigned to the base when Pam was murdered.
We're also going through all the evidence. Is there anything else that we can put back through for any type of testing? Now, the hair that was on her shoulder, we did send that 2 different times for mitochondrial testing, but both times said that there was an insignificant amount of material there in order for a mitochondrial test to be done at that time.
So you just had the hair, you didn't have the root.
Correct.
Okay. You're taking a real leap and a prayer with the dental tech thing, because it's just a theory, like you said.
Correct.
Because Jamie was a dental tech, and because there were these dental tech guys that are just waiting for these girls to graduate and like, hey, let me show you a good time, like, and there's a bunch of them. I mean, it's a good theory, but it was just a theory, right? But it took a lot of effort to run all that down.
It was a lot of effort, yes. But yes, it was a theory, but one that we felt strongly on. In fact, it was so strong, we said, we're going to go through all of these dental techs and the people in the neighborhood, and then we'll focus on, the brother company, her brother company, those guys as well. So we had already started building a database of spreadsheets and database of all of them to get ready to start identifying and trying to collect DNA from as well. Now they're all over the world at this point.
Oh my gosh.
But we figure let's finish with the dental techs. We all feel strongly that the dental tech is the connection, and let's follow it through till we get to the end and we have nowhere else to go on this avenue, and then we'll switch over to the other side.
The other area of interest that Jen is referring to is their belief that the killer was someone who could have had knowledge of the neighborhood where Pam's body was found. Wouldn't the killer have to be familiar with that area to know that that house had been abandoned?
It's just a really creepy looking place, like this old abandoned house that looks about like it's about ready to fall over, and it's overgrown, and just, she was basically dumped there, right?
Yeah, it was in probate for a long time, so the house had been abandoned for a while, and it was dilapidated and fallen apart. And then she was just literally just discarded like a piece of trash, and that house was like off the beaten path. Like, you had to know that area, in my opinion, to find that house to dump her at. It wasn't right off of the interstate or off of a main road.
So investigators start looking at the neighbors.
We were also running another theory of that neighborhood was a well-established neighborhood where generations of people lived in these houses. And so let's focus on the neighborhood. Who lived in the neighborhood at the time? Who was of age that potentially could have done something like this? Who may have been in the Navy also? And so we started running all of the people down, and we ended up, I think, with like 20 people in the neighborhood that we got statements from, got DNA from.
And lo and behold, they get a tip about one specific guy who grew up in the neighborhood.
We had a crime line tip of one guy that was pretty good that we thought could definitely have been responsible.
The tip was about a guy in the military with a violent disposition. His name was Al, and he grew up just a few houses down from the vacant home where Pam's body was dumped. So they brought the 58-year-old in for questioning, and Al claimed the only thing he knew was from the news or his family about Pam's murder. And he also said that when she was killed, he was at sea. However, investigators checked and found out that the ship he was assigned to was actually in port the night Pam was murdered.
But we were able to rule him out from DNA, polygraph. He gave a statement, and we felt comfortable saying that he was not involved in her murder.
Around 2015, Jen got an email from the military who suggested she reach out to a woman named Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick from Identifinders International. They believed that Dr. Fitzpatrick could help narrow down who their killer was using something called genetic genealogy.
Why don't you guys talk to this Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick with Identifinders, talk to her, and she can take the YSTR from your DNA profile and maybe give you a surname or, maybe an area at least of where the suspect came from. And I was like, okay, I'll bite. It's something new, I'll bite.
Within a few days of providing the information to Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick on their suspect DNA profile, Jen got a call that was like a bomb being dropped on their investigation.
I'll never forget, I was at Home Depot with my husband trying to hold up wood while he's cutting it, and she calls me. I get this phone call from her, and she's going on and on, and she's super excited. Then she says, your suspect comes from, I think she said Western Africa, and he's going to be an African-American male. I was like, what? She's like, yeah, you're looking for an African-American male. And I said, no way.
Jen was stunned. Throughout the entire investigation, it was believed that a white male was the murderer. For over a decade, Jamie Bowers had been their prime suspect. And the pubic hair, which they had collected from Pam's shoulder, investigators had been told that it belonged to a white male.
She worked her magic and told us that it was an African-American male. And I remember, she knows that she knows I felt this way. And so I'll just say it. I didn't believe her.
A year later, in 2016, DNA technology improved to the point that there was an amazing new test being offered that could give a snapshot of what their suspect looked like.
It was called Snapshot by Parabon Nanolabs, and they could basically take the DNA and try to give you a representation of what your suspect looks like, right? To face shape and skin color and the tone, and do they have freckles? How about your hair color, your eye color?
And again, Jen says yes to the test.
And I open up the report when I get it back. It was probably a couple months, and I'm reading through the report. And as it's getting further into the description of what our suspect looks like, I'm like, oh boy. So it depicted an African-American male. I called them. I said, are you sure this is our report and this isn't somebody else's? You sent me the wrong one. Nope, this is yours. Your suspect is an African-American male. So at that point in time, I hate to say that it took a second person to tell us, but, we had to shift gears.
What made you, was it because of, I mean, I don't mean to get gross, but was it because of the pubic hair? Is it because you guys were so focused on Jamie? Like, what made you not believe that it was an African-American, the suspect was an African-American male?
Well, because it was a new technique. And so law enforcement are always skeptical when new stuff comes out. And for somebody just overnight to look at your DNA and come back and say, yeah, you have an African-American male and he's from, he's from Alabama. And with having no experience at the time in genealogy or how it works or anything, I was like, yeah, okay. All right. It's new. Plus everybody before me had said Jamie Bowers. Jamie Bowers didn't do anything to help himself, as I previously explained as well. The pubic hair is at that point in time saying it's a Caucasian pubic hair, and the pubic hair was on her bare shoulder. If somebody had had sex with her that killed her and left their pubic hair, and then somebody or had consensual sex with her and left their pubic hair, and then somebody else attacked her and killed her, that pubic hair would not have still be on her shoulder after a violent attack like that.
Investigators had to start back at the beginning. And although Jen was disappointed, no matter what obstacles came her way, her passion for getting justice for Pam never wavered. I have a young kid, and I see the way he yearns for my phone. Well, not my phone, but one for himself. Criminal Mischief parents, I know you can relate. And I don't know about you, but I do blame myself a little bit. Because I have unwittingly encouraged the yearning. I let him use my phone at doctor's appointments or on a long drive, which only makes him want it more. And he's my baby. It's hard to say no. I know it would be easier to just get him one, but I also know, because I have older kids, the huge risk that comes with a cell phone and all that implies. It's just too much for him. At least that's what I thought until I found Gab. Gab phones have all the tech features kids actually want, like unlimited talk and text with Gab Messenger, which, by the way, is the very first messaging and video calling app designed with kids' safety as the top priority. So for my 11-year-old, I got him the Gab Phone 4 Pro, which has hundreds of screened third-party apps that can only be installed with a parent's say-so. Plus, my kid loves music, and Gab has an app for that too. The thing is, I totally trust my kid, but it's the Wild West out there when it comes to cell phones. And the number one thing I love about Gab is that their tech blocks high-risk messages and content from ever reaching his phone. And the reason I can't recommend Gab enough. Right now, Gab is offering $25 off any device with no contract required. Just go to gab.com/mischief to get started. That's Gab, GABB.com/mischief. One more time, gab.com/mischief. Terms and conditions apply.
Pam's family stayed in contact with detectives over the years, and they were very supportive of the detectives and of the investigation and wanted to help in any way they could. They were never pushy. They were never, hard on us or anything like that. They were just, through them, you got to know Pam, and you realized Pam had to have been a great person if she came from this family, because they're all amazing people in her family. All of her siblings are just absolutely amazing.
In today's modern world of crime fighting, genetic genealogy as a tool for law enforcement is something we're used to hearing about, with frequent headlines of long dormant cold cases finally being solved. But when Jen was working Pam's case back in 2016, it was before the Golden State Killer case broke in 2018. That was the first public arrest with the help of genetic genealogy. So in 2016, Jen had a full profile of the suspected killer's DNA. But because he wasn't in CODIS, the National Offender Database, if the suspect wasn't dead, they'd either have to wait for him to get arrested, or if he'd already been incarcerated for a long time, that meant that his DNA profile possibly hadn't been uploaded into the system. But with investigative genetic genealogy, maybe they wouldn't have to wait.
So from 2016, when we got this, now we're like, okay, there's something to this. We're looking for an African-American male. Maybe Jamie's still involved. Maybe there's another Caucasian male still involved because of the pubic hair. So let's go back to the drawing board on the dental techs, and let's start looking for the African-American dental techs. And so that also included going back to a lot of the Caucasian dental techs saying, hey, now we asked you before about Caucasian dental techs you remember working with you. How about African-American dental techs?
But at this point, in 2016, they weren't using investigative genetic genealogy as it is used today to build a family tree from the suspect profile found on Pam, to utilize family member DNA who have voluntarily submitted their DNA to genealogy databases. Jen was going to individual African-American dental techs who were at the base when Pam was murdered and would ask them for a voluntary DNA sample.
Getting DNA, and it's still no match.
They did this kind of DNA collection for 2 years until the Golden State Killer case broke.
That case breaks open. I reach out there to Sacramento, and I said, I need to know what you guys did, how you did it, because we need to do this in our case.
Jen started working with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in the fall of 2018 after they started their own in-house investigative genetic genealogy team, using the information they'd gotten from Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick and from Parabon Labs. A suspect family tree was created with voluntary DNA submissions that law enforcement had legal access to.
It says that he comes from Western Africa, but that his family ties are from Crenshaw County, Alabama, and gave a couple city names in Alabama, and clearly African-American male. And it was a huge family tree. And so we just started going around the country doing interviews and collecting DNA.
What was the response of the family members? Because this is yet another thing that we talk about on the podcast frequently, especially with all these cold cases being solved through investigative genetic genealogy, is just kind of like, do people know what they're signing up for when they sign up to give their DNA, and just kind of like what were the responses when you were door knocking and saying, hey, can we get a sample?
Everybody was very receptive to us. They assisted us with looking at the family tree that we had and would help us make additions where we may have been lacking or make corrections for us. But we were also able to supply them with information on their family that they may not have had. So I felt like we were working together to build the tree out, and they were very receptive. Every single person that we knocked on their door invited us into their homes and talked to us, gave us their DNA, and said that they would assist in any way that they could.
With every new sample they acquired and added to the family tree, they hoped that they were getting closer to their suspect.
I went up to Virginia on a completely different reason. I run the Southeastern Homicide Investigators Association, and we needed a place to have a conference in the year of 2019. And so January of 2019, I fly up to Norfolk, Virginia to check out a couple hotels for potential conference space. And I figure while I'm up there was somebody else on the tree in Virginia. In Fairfax, I'll just rent a car, drive the 3 hours over, knock on his door, and see if he'll talk to me.
Jen says when she knocked on the door, she never knew what to expect, but the conversation always started the same way.
Hey, this is going to sound weird, but this is who I am. And that's all I got out. And he's like, oh, I've been waiting for you. Come on in. So immediately I'm like, are you waiting on me because you're the murderer and you knew I was coming? Or, how do you know that I was coming? You know what I mean?
When you described walking up to this potential relative's doorstep, you really brought me there. Like, you don't know if this is the person, and you're going by yourself. You're in a different state. Am I making it more scary than what it kind of sounds like? I mean, I'm imagining maybe I just seen Clarice Starling and how she goes to the suspect's door. You know what I'm talking about, right? I'm spacing on the name. I can't believe I'm spacing on the name of the movie.
Yeah, and you never Buffalo Bill.
Yeah. But what is the name of the actual movie? I'm totally spacing it. Oh my God.
Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs. Right. Okay. Am I just totally like over dramatizing what your fear level might have been, or is that real?
I mean, I was fine then, and I had another detective with me at the time that wasn't involved in the case at all, but we're always safer in pairs. But I mean, you really never know. And then you're going into these people's homes, and that's their home, their domain. They know if they've got weapons in there, you don't. They know where their weapons are at if they have them, you don't. And people get desperate, and if they feel like the walls are closing in on them, I feel like people are capable of anything.
That's the thing about investigative genetic genealogy. These guys have to know that someday, unless they're living under a rock, they could get a knock on their door, and they're waiting for it, potentially.
I feel these people have been waiting their entire life for that knock on the door.
As it would turn out, this would be another helpful relative. He gave information about the family she'd never heard of. Apparently there was a great aunt who had married a man with the last name Garner. Jen calls their investigative genetic genealogist, who was working the case, and tells her about this branch in the family tree that they'd never heard of before. A few days later, Jen gets a call from the genealogist.
To this day, I can't remember anything she said until the last sentence was, they had 2 boys who are still alive, both were in the military, and both are in Jacksonville, Florida, and one of them's your suspect. I remember thinking, wow, it was that easy. And then because of how fast she just rambled this off in a minute, and then thinking, this has been nothing but easy. This has been a long time of literally blood, sweat, tears. I mean, there are ups, there are a lot of downs in cold case investigations, and a lot of emotions, and you feel like at one point, should I just close the book? I mean, I've done everything and I'm not getting any closer. Are we ever going to solve this? And I tell everybody when I teach that in every cold case, you're going to hit that wall. And when you get to that wall, you've got to figure out a way around it, over it, under it, or through it. But you can't stop at that wall, because on the other side of that wall is a victim and their family who is waiting for you to get onto the other side of that wall and get them justice.
One of the brothers was 59-year-old Thomas Garner. Jen says that when she looked at his driver's license, she couldn't believe his address.
When I graduated high school and I married a guy in the military back then, he was based in Kings Bay, Georgia, but we got an apartment in Jacksonville, Florida, where we were living at the time. This guy, Thomas Garner, was living in that same apartment. Not just the complex, not just the building, but the exact same apartment I lived in. And what are the chances of that happening? It's never happened in my life before, and it probably never will. So to me, that was a sign that was our guy.
Well, let me ask you a question. Was he a dental tech?
He was a dental tech in the Navy, and he was stationed in Orlando, Florida at the time that Pam was murdered.
They placed Garner's apartment building under surveillance.
We set up surveillance, and after the second full day of no activity, we were able to observe him come out and discard trash in the trash compactor that we retrieved that day and had it sent to the lab for testing.
Sunglasses, dark jeans. He's carrying a big bag with looks like laundry, and I think he's got a garbage bag walking towards the composter.
There's a photo of Jen in a dumpster, searching for that bag of garbage that Garner had discarded.
They rushed them for us, and I was able to come to the lab the following day at noon and get the results.
And what was that like for you?
Oh, I did not sleep Friday night. could not wait till noon on Saturday. I was just a nervous wreck because it was going to go one of two ways. Either we are on the right path and we know who's responsible for killing Pam, or we're back to the drawing board.
Thomas Garner's DNA was a match for the profile left in Pamela's underwear and the DNA recovered from under her fingernails. On March 13th, 2019, investigators showed up en masse at his apartment. They knocked on his door, and Thomas Garner cracks it open. Detectives ask if they can come inside. They sit down and show him a photo of Pamela Cajanes.
Did you feel that he knew that it was coming, or that was it a complete shock?
When we knocked on his door and said NCIS and the Seminole County Sheriff's Office where I worked at the time, when we knocked on that door and told him that, he looked past us, and I swear to this day, he was looking for that Calvary, and they were there. You couldn't see them, but they were there. And when we walked into his apartment and he opened the blinds were closed, he opened them and sat himself where he could observe out the window. 100%, I believe he was waiting for that. He was waiting for that ambush of tactical guys coming through his door. I have no doubt he was waiting. And I told him during the interview, I said, is this some type of relief for you? Relief? How? I said, because you don't have to look over your shoulder anymore. We're here. I have no idea what you're talking about.
What he didn't know was that they already knew his DNA matched the sample left in her underwear and under her fingernails. In the interrogation room, they revealed the DNA evidence.
So if you didn't have sex with our victim, Pamela Cajanes, how did your semen get on her?
My semen?
Yes.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm telling you, when she was found, there's semen on her, okay? And they've taken that semen, obviously, and done analysis over the years, and it has very recently been proven that it is yours. It is your DNA. So how do you explain your semen on her?
I don't know. I don't know how that could be possible. I mean, this is bizarre. This is almost like the Twilight Zone.
But Garner's story never changed. He said he had nothing to do with her murder.
I wonder how come he never came up in any of your, when you were talking to people. Did you ever figure that out?
He was a loner, and so nobody really hung out with him. And his name ended up coming up in one conversation we had with another dental tech that he ended up in a altercation with about 4 months after Pam's murder. And both of them ended up getting court-martialed, and both of them kicked out of the military because of it. Because of a fight between the two of them that they both ended up in the hospital over, that ended up getting them both court-martialed and kicked out of the Navy.
But did he have any kind of criminal record other than just getting the court-martial later?
No, he had no other criminal history. At the end of the day, he really just did not have any friends in the military or anybody that he hung out with on a frequent basis. So nobody brought his name up because he was pretty much insignificant to them.
Thomas Garner was arrested for the first-degree murder of Pamela Cajanes, 35 years after her murder. Meanwhile, Jen was on her way to Minnesota to share the news of the arrest with Pam's family. Remember, she was one of 8 siblings, and they were all there when Jen arrived. She asked them to sit around a table and told them that she wanted to show them a video.
You okay, Mr. Garner?
Yes, sir. All right. What are you guys doing here?
Obviously, we want to let you know you are under arrest for first-degree murder of Pamela Cajanes.
And so the video starts with, Thomas Garner, I like to say, eating pavement. He's face down on the ground with a bunch of tactical guys around him. And then they pick him up, and Bill and I walk up to him. He asks what's going on, and I say, you're under arrest for first-degree murder, the 1984 murder of Pamela Cajanes. And we played that because so the family at first, they were like, what is this? They're like, who is this guy? And what is this? We're like, oh, that's our day yesterday. They're like, oh, okay, that's cool. And they did not know what was going on until they heard me tell him he was under arrest for her murder. And to me, that was best thing in this case. To this day is just,
I literally just got chills. I mean,
I get them every time I tell the story and every time I think about it, and it brings tears to my eyes because they're all, I couldn't even imagine, and I will never can feel like I can imagine what they were going through, because if it's confusion, it's shock, it's you know, joy, it's, is this for real? I mean, there was so much emotion going through them at that time, and all the siblings were there either in person or on Zoom, you know, other than one that was having surgery, unfortunately, but she knew that we were coming to talk to them and they filled her in after that. So everybody in the family was privy to what was going on and got to hear it, you know, firsthand.
Jen presented the family with the handcuffs she'd used to arrest Garner the day before.
To get a pair of new handcuffs that nobody had been in, use them to arrest him, and then give them to the family.
In May of 2021, a jury found Thomas Garner guilty of first-degree murder. We don't know the circumstances behind how Thomas Garner met Pam that night, but investigators have a theory that Pam was walking back to the base after her day of shopping, and that somehow Garner was able to talk her into his car, where at some point he attacked her. They don't believe Pam's murder was a crime of passion, but a premeditated attack from the moment he laid eyes on her. But the case wasn't over yet. Just weeks after the conviction, Thomas Garner's DNA was linked to a similar murder case in Hawaii of a young woman named Kathy Hicks, who'd been killed in September of 1982.
So Honolulu started going through some of their cold cases and putting old evidence back through that either wasn't ever tested or stuff that technology is better now. So they put this case through, and my case now, he was now uploaded into CODIS because we got standards directly from him. They were uploaded into CODIS, and then it matched from their case from 1982.
Kathy was a Delta Airlines employee who was also 25 years old. She'd been assaulted and strangled to death. At the time of her murder, Thomas Garner was stationed in Honolulu.
did he know Kathy?
It sounds almost the exact same story where he met her at the military base club, probably. And then he was with her the night before she died. He was seen with her by at least 3 of her coworkers that they were all out there for a softball tournament with Delta. Introduced himself to them. He said he was from Alabama, but grew up in Georgia, or grew up in Jacksonville, which is true. And he was last with her, he said, like 4:30 in the morning, and then 7 o'clock in the morning, she's found dead, dumped on the side of a road.
Thomas Garner would be indicted for the second-degree murder of Kathy Hicks. However, during the trial, the jury would not be allowed to know about Pam's murder and his conviction. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury would find him not guilty of Kathy's murder. Jen believes that this isn't the last time you'll hear about Thomas Garner being linked to a cold case homicide.
I feel like I haven't closed that door yet. My case is closed, but I just can't close that door because I so strongly feel he's responsible for other murders.
Up next, Criminal Mischief bonus content. Here, my co-host Branden Morgan and I discuss the case in more detail. And hey, just so you know, Criminal Mischief episodes and bonus content are now available on YouTube, so check us out and subscribe to our channel. And as always, thanks for listening. From Cloud 10, Criminal Mischief is a pie-in-the-sky production recorded in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We're produced by Branden Morgan and myself, music by Soundstripe. I'm Carolyn Osorio, your writer and host.